Joining us now, Ryan Girdusky, founder of the 1776 Project Political Action Committee and the co-author of the book, They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the Nationalist Populist Revolution. Ryan, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So there is no ideological mooring to the left's attacks on JD Vance. This is just simply he's on the other team, so therefore we have to hate him, right?
Well, I mean, their whole thing is they believe, like Van Jones was in the White House when Trump was president. So their goal, their fallback position was, listen, Trump's probably going to win, but we can work with it because we don't think that he will, that we can bribe him somehow, or we can make sure that he changes his position on things if we surround him with the right people. The left part of the party, we can sit there and get what we want out of him. And they don't think that they could do it with JD, because JD really does believe in what he says. And that's what they're upset about. They don't mind a Republican that they could sit there and kind of pull the wool off their eyes, or that they were hoping they would have a Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush style presidency, where they could have somebody who would say to, how Bush said to Reagan, oh, you better moderate, you need to moderate, or how a lot of people around Trump the first term could say to him, oh, you need to moderate, you need to moderate.
Right.
The fact that JD believes what he believes is very concerning to them.
So an example of this might be, and as you mentioned, like Van Jones or Kim Kardashian going to Trump and getting him to work on helping to release people from jail. And so what you're pointing out is, well, this means that Trump is going to have somebody who is on his side, first and foremost, and believes really much in the well-being of the American people, and will give Trump wise counsel, and that is annoying to Van Jones because it makes it harder to co-opt Trump.
Right, exactly, and I think that that's way better than how I put it. But that is exactly what they were hoping for. They were hoping for somebody, and I don't know, Doug Burgum, but he is a very moderate guy, and they were hoping for someone like Glenn Youngkin, who's a businessman. And they thought that, he has a lot of moderate positions. He won in Blue Virginia. Therefore, they could be able to have another voice in the room to say, no, it's important that you pull back from your positions that they consider extreme.
Yeah.
JD Vance ran on those positions that they considered extreme, and he won on them. And by the way, as a senator, for all their crowing about how radical JD Vance is, he's gotten a lot of co-sponsorship across the aisle when it came to working class issues for voters. When it came to things like the rail reform with Sherrod Brown, he sat there and he was one of the biggest sponsors of it. When it came he co-sponsored legislation with Tim Kaine to repeal authorization for military force in Iraq, which they allegedly cared about for over 20 years. He worked with Tammy Baldwin on foreign corporations using advanced technology.
Yeah.
Dick Durbin on transparency for Medicare coverage. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But it's all to do with working class issues. But they don't really care about the working class. They very much care about making sure politics continues as usual, into eternity.
Sure. And also, you heard, insofar as we can detect ideological objections in Van Jones's screed there, one of the reasons he's upset about J.D. Vance is that J.D. thinks it's important that America look after her own sovereignty first. His view was like, we're going to be less globalist if J.D. Vance is in the White House. Well, that's what Americans want. That's literally what the voters want. The left constantly crows about democracy, but when it comes to what the people actually desire, they really couldn't care less.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, if you look at even like the Cato poll from 2021 on immigration, this is before Biden kicked open the doors, something like 65% of Americans wanted at least a 50% reduction in immigration. Something like 40% wanted a 90% reduction. And you tell that to the left and they would lose their minds. And it's not about having representative democracy.
Yeah.
And the fact is that JD does speak for a majority of Republican voters on most of these issues, and I would say probably a majority of independent voters on these issues. And the machine of DC is meant to hold back from the voters ever getting what they want.
I do think one of the primary reasons you've seen establishment objection to J.D. Vance, in particular from Republicans who are saying, don't let him be the guy, is Ukraine. That seems to be the number one reason why the flag was being thrown by establishment Republicans in Washington, because J.D. Vance has dared to voice concern about where this mission in Ukraine is heading, why we're spending so much money, why hundreds of thousands of people are dying, and why nobody's actually trying to pursue peace in any meaningful way.
Well, Ukraine and immigration, because he's also sat there and said that the H-1B system is full of frauds and needs to be completely revamped, and mass immigration is hurting Americans. The fact that he has been willing to, he is like Trump in a very specific way, because people forget in 2015, 2016, JD Vance is a young 30-something-year-old, 30-year-old, 31-year-old, was a legitimate celebrity in his own right. He was going on Stephen Colbert's show. He was being invited onto David Letterman and whatnot. And he gave it all up to run from the nationalist right, when it could have been the easiest thing in the world from him to run as Mitt Romney.
Well, and the reason
celebrate Republican.
And the reason he was a celebrity was because the Hollywood was treating him as the muse to the unwashed masses. Explain them to us. Tell us who they are. That's what they were begging JD Vance to do at the time. Now they're going to memory hole that big time. They're going to pretend like he has no connection whatsoever to the very people he became famous representing.
You know, JD told me a story one time that he was at a dinner. I worked for JD's Senate campaign in 2022 on the Super PAC side, and JD told me a story one time about how he was at a dinner, and one of these billionaires at these dinners was complaining about he just can't get enough foreign-born workers to replace Americans for cheaper wages. And he said he was so disgusted. He was like one of those light bulb moments where he was like, wow, the rot is so deep that there's no changing this from the enlightened liberal perspective, that this is really their view of workers in America is really in much contempt. And I think that is a big part of it. And that's why you had a lot of people sitting there from the Republican establishment who, by the way, have hated him. Now they all say how they love him. But you had people conspiring, over the top, conspiring. There's a very, very well-known Republican pollster who's on television every 30 seconds, as long as she can get her mug in front of the camera, who was sitting there and saying, over my dead body will JD Vance be vice president, and screaming that she had thwarted the operation, even though she failed miserably at it. But people like that were sitting there and pledging and promising that they were going to stop him. And also, mind you, there were a lot of Republicans who work on campaigns for a living who have been grifting off of the MAGA and Trump movement for years now, who don't feel who are hoping for another candidate to run in 2028 that they could grift off of as well, and they don't believe they can get that with JD. So that was also a big reason that a lot of people were pushing Trump not to accept it, is because the gravy train means a lot to these people as well. So there was an ideological factor, there was a money factor, and JD was, everyone who hated Trump in 2016 and now loves him now, hated JD.
Of course. And now that Trump has selected him, I like JD Vance. I'm very pleased with this pick. I think it's great. And obviously you do too. But you're right. Now that Trump has selected him, there's going to be a lot of memory holing the old positions. Oh yeah, JD's great. Oh, he's great. How are these two men? Oh yeah, huge fan. How are these two men going to work together, do you think? President Trump is an interesting guy, unique guy to work for. Obviously it's his vision that the people are contemplating, and when they elect him, they're electing him to execute his vision. So how do you see JD Vance fitting in that world?
Well, the next big role that Trump has to pick is the head of transition, which should be announced within the next few days if it hasn't been announced yet today. But the head of transition is in charge of sitting there and selecting most of the jobs required to fill the next administration. This is a very important role. It's the role that Christie had in 2016 that Jared Kushner stopped him from executing correctly. And that's why a lot of RNC people just jumped in the void, because it was a giant void right after Christie and Kushner were feuding. So that's going to be the big question: is who is the head of transition, and then who is being interviewed for top level positions within the next administration in the Justice Department and the Secretary of State's Department and DHS. That will be very important, and I think JD may be advising Trump on certain people for certain positions. And I think that maybe JD will be working to sit there and stopping several people who have not always had the president's best interest and the president's voters' best interest from getting several positions.
So what you're either hoping for or maybe suspecting, or both, is that JD Vance will be deputized to do meaningful things in a Trump administration, rather than give speeches about her favorite school buses and Venn diagrams.
Yeah, I don't believe JD will serve as, the king and prince of England does, just to sit there and go to school openings and cut ribbons.
Right.
I think he has. He's 39 years old, youngest vice presidential candidate since Richard Nixon. I think that he has a lot of energy and ambition. I know he does. I've known him for several years now. A lot of ambition to do something and to do something meaningful on behalf of the American public.
Yeah.
And it depends on what goes on in the next election down ballot. If Trump is reelected and they have a Republican Congress, then certain things get done. If they don't have a Republican Congress, then other things can't get done. So I think that's a very, very big choice. But I think the most important task at hand, aside from getting elected, is who do you pick to do there and to create the next administration.
That's super important. In addition, when you talk about Congress, should JD Vance become the vice president of the United States, Ohio's going to need a new senator. I said yesterday that, this is perfect. Vivek Ramaswamy lives there. And the caucus of people who would be skeptical of mindless spending on foreign wars would grow should Vivek be added to the Senate by Governor Mike DeWine. What do you expect is going to happen there?
Yeah, I would suspect you have a better chance of seeing the dinosaurs come back to life than Vivek being picked by Mike DeWine. So I would not sit there and put my money on that one. Yeah, I have heard rumors, and they're just rumors. So I wouldn't put too much money behind them. That he has said that he wants a woman. Ohio does not have a single Republican woman in any federal position, and they haven't for a very, very long time. That's just a rumor that I've heard, but I've heard it from a very, very good source.
I believe it. DeWine, what did DeWine, didn't he veto a transgender bill or something that was like designed to stop men from being in women's bathrooms? He's one of the weaker Republican governors. He did do the heartbeat bill.
Yeah, and listen, he's a very squishy Republican, but he cares a lot about that stuff. He's also been in politics since I think the 1970s almost. Yeah. He's been there for a very long time. And he won his reelection by huge margins. And I've heard over and over again from people in Ohio that I really respect and trust that he has mentioned that he wants a woman to replace, if the seat opens, to replace him. And I think they wouldn't fill up the full term. I think they fill up maybe a year or two, and then they run for a full term. But if the person wants to run and they're already an incumbent, it becomes very difficult to unseat them. But yeah, I mean, listen, Vivek also could have ran for Senate this time and didn't. So who knows if he even wants the job?
Maybe.
But this is what I've heard from people in Ohio is that he wants a woman to replace JD.
And you don't think he would succumb to pressure if Trump started browbeating him into submission?
Well, he didn't endorse Trump's people this time. I mean, Trump endorsed Bernie Moreno, and DeWine endorsed against him and campaigned against him.
Right. So
I don't think that is going to be an influence for him. It didn't happen this time when Trump has a lot of influence and JD had a lot of influence. DeWine kind of does his own thing. He's kind of at the end of his career. It's not like he's going to run for president one day. So I imagine he'll do what he wants.
So he's going to go with, we got to put a woman in. That's so important. It's like ridiculous. All right. Anyway, Ryan Girdusky, thank you very much. Good to talk to you.